Welcome back, everyone. This is Stranger Than Fiction Bible Study Part 7. I'm Pastor Duane, and I'm coming to you from out of the beautiful sanctuary of the Bridge Church in Enterprise, Alabama. I thought we would get away from the office for a bit and introduce this episode right here. I'm not going to get behind the pulpit up there or anything like that, because in the past I have promised that there wouldn't be a sermon in this program, just an old-fashioned Bible study. In the last two episodes, we studied in the mid part of human history where the kingdom of Israel evolved from a nation of high spiritual values down to a nation full of self-prioritized motives that God could not deal with. Now we are going to back up and start all over again at the beginning of world history as we focus on a division of humanity that became prominent over the rest. So let's get back to the office. Before we get into the study, I would like to remind everyone, and especially those who are watching for the first time, of a term that I use quite often during the course of these studies. It is ProICG, which represents idolized carnal goals. It is everything that mankind craves for and lusts after, which is pleasure, comfort, freedom, power, admiration, and public respect. Those are the 6 components of ICG. That should remedy any lack of understanding that might happen. Let's pause for prayer. We thank you, dear Lord, for all the many blessings of life, and help us to understand all the details that we need to know in order to serve you in the right way. We ask that you be with us as we study this issue of pagan culture in this episode. Help us to understand all the things that we need to know so that we can be right and pleasing in your sight. We ask these things in Christ's name. Amen. All right, let's get started. From the beginning of human history, all of mankind has been fascinated by the aspects of ICG, but the human race was soon to become divided up into 2 different sections that conflicted against each other. One side that allowed the attractions of ICG to control them, and the other side that wouldn't allow it to influence the direction of their path that was set by God. The very first person to allow ICG to control him was Cain, the first person to be born into the world. This is why Cain chose to carry out the altar sacrifice in a different way than what God had instructed, which made it a respect paid to his own preference rather than God's. So because of that, God rejected his offering, which is described in the 4th chapter of Genesis. Adam and Eve had been instructed personally by the Lord and had been faithful at teaching it all to their sons, the proper manner in which to serve God, which is something that is not described in the Bible, but we know that it is true simply because of how Abel was being portrayed as faithful to what he had been taught. Many seem to think that just because something wasn't mentioned in the Bible, that it didn't happen. That's not true. Because when something is written down, it is usually because it was something out of the ordinary that wasn't part of everyday events, which makes it story-worthy. That's just the way life is. No one wants to take the time to listen to something that is life as usual. If the conflict that Cain stirred up by his behavior wouldn't have happened, that story wouldn't even be in the Bible, which means that God's request for the altar sacrifice wouldn't have been made a prominent issue. However, because Abel was faithful to the pro-sacrifice realm, he became the first victim of the bruised head symbol in Genesis 3:15 by being persecuted and killed by his brother Cain, who had taken on the mentality of the pro-ICG realm, which created a separate division in the human race that was obsessive over the sources of ICG. And when any violence broke out or any kind of controversy took place, it was the pro-ICG advocates who were responsible for it. Because of this mental devotion to the fleshly gratifications of ICG, Cain was branded with a symbolic mark as one who was a pro-ICG advocate, which is what we see in Genesis 4:15. So let's take a look at that. And the Lord said unto him, Therefore, whosoever slayeth Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord set a mark upon Cain, lest any finding him should kill him. Whether this was a literal mark or not is irrelevant. It is still symbolic for how Cain's mind was motivated with ICG. It branded him as the forerunner of the new division of the human race that would spoil every part of the paradise that God had created, even going so far as to win over members of Adam and Eve's line of humanity. When Cain left his parents and became a vagabond, a wanderer, he spent a lot of years all alone, perhaps as much as 200 to 300 years, all by himself. But by then, Adam and Eve had a lot of great-granddaughters who were like strangers to Cain. So he was able to lure one of them away to become his wife. And with her, he began to populate the second division of the human race with pro-ICG mannerisms. However, as Cain influenced his branch of humanity, they were not accepted by God as his people because of their habits of indulging in the fleshly sensations of ICG, rather than practicing a pro-sacrifice lifestyle and paying respect to God, which is what we see in Romans 9:8. So let's check that out. That is, they which are the children of the flesh, these are not the children of God, but the children of the promise are counted for the seed. However, Adam and Eve's division continued to honor and respect God with an active pro-sacrifice theme that gave God their time and full respect for everything he requested. Therefore, he accepted them as his sons, which is what we are told in Romans 8:14. So let's take a look at that. For as many as are led by the Spirit of God, they are the sons of God. In any society that is obsessive over ICG, there are going to be prominent figures who stand out more obvious than normal, such as celebrities and politicians. But in ancient days, it was limited to philosophers and fortune tellers who gave advice and even gave battle strategies that were carried out by warriors and kings. People would find pleasure and comfort in being told that their fate will give them everything that they crave for in life. And the warriors would win battles for them, making them feel safe, with a king making sure that it would all last. Because of all that, these counselors and mighty heroes became famous and widely respected. In the process of time, Cain's line of humanity became built up with lots of beautiful women and many great and renowned philosophers and warriors, even to the point of being giants among men, which created an irresistible temptation to the men of God's people from Adam and Eve's family as they mingled together. It didn't take very long for a lot of Samson and Delilah romances to blossom, which is what is being described in Genesis 6, verses 1 and 2 and 4. So let's check that out. And it came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. And verse 4. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them. The same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. The Hebrew word here for giants is Nephil, which means bully or tyrant, a giant in physical force. But it's not the same as the word Rapha, that literally means a large and tall person, which is the word used more times in the Bible for a giant than any other word when referring to Goliath. So we're not talking about physical giants here, only highly respected men and great warriors that were masters at being bullies and tyrants to whomever they directed their fierce and hostile actions toward. It is only natural that people who were obsessed with ICG would crave to capture and possess as much fertile land and livestock as they could get their hands on. So thieves and renegade warriors rose up and caused havoc for innocent people. This caused the respectable people of the land to band together in groups and depend fully upon the advice of the philosophers and the great fighting heroes for protection, who were powerful warriors which were usually influenced by kings who worked to create havens for the well-to-do members of society. When the young men of Adam and Eve's family visited these havens, it was an enticing opportunity at hand to enjoy the daughters of men and live a lavish lifestyle, which was sort of like a country boy leaving the farm and going into the city in search of a more exciting life. However, as the two divisions of mankind blended together, it caused a lot of pro-sacrifice men to be lost to the pro-ICG realm. After that, the pro-ICG population sort of exploded into the majority, producing a lot of worldly-minded people who weren't interested in crippling themselves with a theme of sacrifice. Because of this, as you will notice in the very next couple of verses, God relates his displeasure about what is going on with mankind, as he states in Genesis 6, verses 5 and 6. So let's check that out. And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. Because of what was going on, the pro-sacrifice realm had shrunk. And the original faithful ones of old had died off, which caused God to think about creating the flood and to consider contacting someone in the pro-sacrifice realm to convey his intentions to destroy the world. However, the pro-ICG division of mankind were enjoying a perfect environment which was composed of perfect weather, a perfect food supply, and perfect health. So there was no apparent reason why it should all be cut off with destruction. In fact, the idea of that just didn't make any sense to them. Therefore, God singled out Noah, who was a righteous pro-sacrifice advocate, and gave him a powerful dream that provided him with all the information he needed about a coming flood and how to escape it by building the ark and inviting everyone to come aboard. But when Noah related the message to the people, it wasn't received well because it was a message of sacrifice, which is the kind of message that the ProICG hate and despise. So that is why they refuse to believe it. Nevertheless, the rest is history, as the residents of the antediluvian world soon discovered that their mental mirage, which pictured a blissful paradise in their future, was dreadfully faulty and inaccurate, which caused them to express unbelief in the truth, and then to all be swept away by a torrent of floodwater. The same thing will happen to many people at the second coming of Jesus, because that is what Jesus himself told us in Matthew 24, verses 37 to 39. So let's take a look at that. But as the days of Noah were, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. For as in the days that were before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered into the ark, and knew not until the flood came and took them all away, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. How do we know that people are being misled by a mental mirage, just like the people before the flood were? I mean, there has to be a way to identify what's going on. There is one thing that makes it clearly obvious. When someone totally ignores a sign or a piece of evidence, that makes it a sure thing that the mental mirage is in control. The antediluvian people were given a substantial sign that the flood was coming when all the animals marched into the ark in perfect order. They should have realized that a higher power was at work. But no, what did they do? They simply ignored it because their mental mirage was more important to them. So they chose to trust it as a clever, natural instinct instead of respecting the truth. This same thing is going to happen at the end of the world because many people have been led to trust in faulty interpretations of prophecy that ignore vital pieces of evidence in the Bible. One such fact that has been totally ignored is found in two different places in the Bible. Isaiah 34:4 and Revelation 6:14, where it describes the heavens being rolled away like a scroll, which is the removing of the atmosphere. Put that together with Jeremiah 4:25, where it says that all the birds were fled away, which only makes sense if there is no air for them to fly in. There's only one reason to remove the air: to preserve the contents of the earth so that nothing spoils or rots away, which means this is being done to prepare for an extended period of time where the earth will be an airless vacuum. No one has ever come up with a good account for that. So a person who is really smart will give that issue some deep thought. We will study more about this in a future episode. The flood wiped out all of those who were pro-ICG motivated, which eliminated those who caused the violence and were an offense to God, as he indicated in Genesis 6:7. But in the very next text, verse 8, we are told that Noah found grace in God's eyes, which was because of his pro-sacrifice nature. However, God was wise enough to know that it wouldn't take very long for a whole new generation of pro-ICG advocates to be born into the world. Therefore, he took that into a consideration as one of the reasons why he brought on the flood. So he made provisions for protecting and blessing the future of all those he would find grace in within the pro-sacrifice realm. God knew that the pro-ICG realm would once again become the majority of the world population and go on to dominate and persecute the members of the pro-sacrifice realm. So what would be desperately needed was a refuge for them to escape to, where they could be free to practice and live a lifestyle of God-ordained sacrifice without facing oppression. So what was needed was an isolated piece of land that was far enough away to be unreachable by primitive travel. That is why God created the American continent by bringing the flood upon the world, which made a refuge for those seeking to escape from dominating forces in the world that were pro-ICG motivated. Therefore, when Noah and his family stepped out of the ark and into an empty world, they went about rebuilding the land and repopulating it. But it didn't take very long to procreate sons and grandsons that were determined to live a life filled with pleasure and self-indulgent habits, and then set in motion events that would make a big impact on the world. The most prominent one to do all this and set the whole world on a collision course with heathenistic rituals was Nimrod, the great-grandson of Noah. He was a mighty hunter and became highly respected by his fellow man, which is what we see in Genesis 10:9. So let's take a look at that. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Wherefore it is said, even as Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. The Hebrew word for before is paneh, which means against. Nimrod was a mighty hunter that was against God because he put his own concerns ahead of God, which is what everyone who is pro-ICG motivated does. Then in verse 10, we are told, and the beginning of his kingdom was Babel. Nimrod founded the ancient city of Babylon and then took a wife by the name of Semiramis, who became the queen of Babylon. As time passed, Nimrod died, and Queen Semiramis became concerned that another man would step in and take control. So she dreamed up the most elaborate lie to ensure that she would remain in control of the kingdom. The people were anxiously waiting to see who would succeed Nimrod. So she appeared before the people with all the splendor and majesty of a great leader and announced to all of them that the gods of the sky had revealed to her that their great king was now serving his people in an exalted position. The queen told the people that Nimrod had an invisible life force, a spirit, so to speak, which was something they never heard of before. She told them that Nimrod's spirit had ascended into the sun, and now he was their sun god. And of course, she would be the go-between. The people literally ate it up because she happened to be a great leader, and also because they loved the idea of having a hero watching over them every day, because it made them feel comfortable and fully content with life. The queen laid out all the rules of worship. Everyone was to bow to the east every morning as the sun peeked over the horizon to give their thanks. At first, this was practiced every day, but it is only natural that it would get tiresome real fast, so they trimmed it down to their own special day once a week, which was thought to be a great event on the most important day that was first in the lineup of the days of the week. This practice soon caught on as a tradition, and it was passed down from generation to generation, and with each succeeding generation, a respect and a trust in the elders was built up, with the assumption that the elders were intellectually cued in on what was best for mankind, so everyone from old to young were taught to trust the guidance of the elders. Once the people started getting a smooth sense of relief from everyday stress just from believing a hero God was watching over them, they started looking for other concepts to adopt that would give comfort in other areas of life, such as life and death, revenge and punishment, prosperity and good fortune, consequences and rewards. All these commodities of existence were exploited with superstitious absurdity as pagan culture gathered remedies for the troubles of life, even going so far as human sacrifices with virgins and babies in an effort to appease different types of gods, which was the extreme of all the pagan practices that first got started in ancient Babylon. However, the main focus of paganism is to try to imitate Christianity, with such legends as Tammuz, who was the counterfeit son of God that was mentioned in Ezekiel 8:14. Then there was many false messiahs that archaeologists discovered when ancient artifacts that proved their existence were uncovered. They portrayed all the features of the true Messiah with such things as the virgin birth, having 12 disciples, and being crucified between two thieves. Evidence of pagan gods have been discovered all over Europe, with many of them being false messiahs that existed hundreds of years before Christ's time, such as Mithra and Zoroaster of Persia, Adius, Dionysus, and Serapis of Greece, and then Romulus and Mithras of Rome, and many more that are too numerous to go into. But these counterfeits don't reflect the features of the true Messiah as much as one of Egypt does, known as Horus, who archaeologists claim existed 3,000 years before Christ, which is most likely not an accurate date, but it does put him as one of the first to come along. The ancient artifacts that were discovered concerning Horus listed his features as being almost identical to Christ's, even going so far as to describe that he worshipped on the first day of the week. Up until this point, there had been no evidence to prove that the pagans had their own day of worship, but this makes it clear that they did. How did all these false messiahs get set up with the features that so closely resembled the life of Jesus Christ? It was a masterpiece of deception, the work of Satan as a scheme to discredit the true Messiah. Anyone who copies anything that was done before is looked upon with contempt. But in this case, with the Messiah, the copies came into the world first before the real thing did. How did that happen? I'm not going to go too far into this because I already explained it in the first episode of this series, where we found that Job 1:6 describes how a council meeting was held in heaven and all the representatives of other worlds in the universe went to it, including Satan, because at that time he legally represented the earth. Well, all he had to do was sit and listen to how the plan of salvation would be carried out on earth, as it was explained to everyone. At that first moment, when he heard all of this, the devil started scheming how he could discredit the truth by making it appear as though it was an act of plagiarism, and humans would fall for it simply because they don't have the knowledge and wisdom to realize what is going on. This raises the question as to how many other counterfeit plots has the devil got out there. However, at that same council meeting, it was no doubt brought up that at that period in Earth's history, which was just before Abraham came on the scene, there was once again not too many people who were faithful to God, which made it appear as though the devil was most successful. That's why the Lord challenged him to a test, to simply prove that he wasn't in total control of the earth. That is when Job was brought into the picture as the subject of the test. The Lord knew that there was something unusual about Job. Otherwise, he wouldn't have challenged Satan to this test. That something was a totally dedicated pro-sacrifice nature, which made it so that Job would have endured any kind of troubles to the death for the cause of God, making it a successful test. Job's wife wasn't even motivated with the pro-sacrifice theme because she told him to curse God and die in Job 2:9, which would have given a temporary sense of relief to blame it all on God, like many do when they take his name in vain, something that is a pro-ICG habit. Therefore, God determined that it was time to establish an institution in the earth that would teach and train people with pro-sacrifice qualities. That is when Abraham was chosen to lead out as the forerunner of the pro-sacrifice realm, but his was only a small part of passing it all down to his descendants. When Isaac came along, it was again simply his duty to pass it all along to his children. But because of primitive forms of thought, Isaac didn't recognize what was required to make the pro-sacrifice realm work when he intended to pass it all on to Esau, who was not the type of person that could make it work. At that time in history, only God knew that the type of person who would make everything work was Jacob, which is why God despised Esau, but he loved Jacob, which is what we are told in Romans 9:13. So let's take a look at that. As it is written, Jacob have I loved, but Esau have I hated. God didn't really hate Esau as a person. He simply hated the nature that he had taken on, which was pro-ICG to the core. Jacob was pro-sacrifice, therefore God could work with him. But Esau wouldn't surrender his pro-ICG motives, even when he sought out God with tears, which is what we see in Hebrews 12, 16, and 17. So let's check that out. Lest there be any fornicator or profane person as Esau, who for one morsel of meat sold his birthright. For ye know how that afterward, when he would have inherited the blessing, he was rejected. For he found no place of repentance, though he sought it carefully with tears. There are many theories in the world as to what makes a person good. Many claim that it is pride and honor, but the real thing that makes people acceptable to God is a theme of sacrifice that is buried within the heart. The distinguished author of many self-help books, Napoleon Hill, once stated, "Great achievement is usually born of great sacrifice and is never the result of selfishness." The great educational activist of India, Sadhu Vaswani, once also stated, "True love is selfless. It is prepared to sacrifice." Pro-sacrifice motives bring forth true love, which is what God is looking for. But pro-ICG brings forth only claims of love that are phony and not truly dedicated. The difference between these two mindsets is what makes up all the difference between true religion and the false, which is something that encompasses the whole outlay of religious values and the accuracy of prophetic interpretations. So we are just getting started as we study these issues out. But that's all for now. Thank you for being with us, and we'll see you next time. But don't forget, check out my website at www.last-dayrevival.com. And if you feel moved to help support this ministry, you can do it on that site. It will be greatly appreciated. Thank you, and God bless.